The ship landed with a soft hiss on the surface of New Purgatory. The planet stretched out in all directions like a graveyard of broken dreams. Cracked domes from abandoned settlements dotted the horizon, while ash-colored dust swirled in lazy spirals around them. Dr. Alara Voss stepped off the landing ramp and pulled her scanner from its holster. Her boots crunched against the ground as she moved forward, scanning the desolate terrain. Behind her, Commander Marcus Ryle followed, his hand resting on the sidearm strapped to his leg. He had seen plenty of failed colonies in his time, but there was something different about this one. It felt too quiet. Too wrong. This place feels like it should be haunted, Marcus said, breaking the silence. Dr. Voss glanced at him with a raised eyebrow. Haunted is an interesting word, Commander. I would prefer unexplained. That is what we are here to investigate after all. Technician Daryl Hume was the last to step off the ship, lugging a heavy case of tools behind him. He was muttering under his breath as he adjusted the straps on his gear. "Why do I always get stuck with the creepy missions?" he said. "First it's asteroid drills, now it's ghost planets. What's next, killer robots?" "Focus, Hume," Alara said as she moved forward. They were approaching the central plaza of the colony. It was exactly as the reports had described. Tables and chairs sat overturned as if the colonists had fled in a hurry. Personal items littered the ground, untouched by time, but eerily preserved in the thin atmosphere. Alara stopped in front of a memorial plaque bolted to the center of the plaza. It was covered in dust, but the names engraved on its surface were still legible. These were the first settlers, she said quietly. All of them declared dead or missing when the colony collapsed. "What happened to you?" As if in response to her words, the ground trembled faintly. A cold wind swept through the plaza, carrying with it a faint whisper. Alara froze. "Did anyone else hear that?" she asked, her voice tense. Marcus drew his sidearm, scanning the area. "I heard something," he said. "A voice, maybe. But it was faint. Too faint." Hume dropped his case with a loud thud and immediately regretted it. The sound echoed across the plaza like a gunshot. "Okay, that is enough creepy for me," he said. "Can we just set up the equipment and go home?" "No," Alara said sharply. "We are not leaving until we understand what is happening here. Something wiped out this colony, and if we don't figure out what it was, it could happen again." Hume sighed and began unpacking the equipment, muttering under his breath. Marcus stood nearby, keeping watch, his eyes scanning every shadow. Alara activated her scanner again and pointed it toward the abandoned buildings surrounding the plaza. The readings were strange. Energy signatures that didn't match anything in their database. Pockets of heat where there should have been none. She took a step forward, following the signal. Her heart raced as the scanner beeped more insistently. She entered one of the buildings, stepping carefully over debris. The air inside felt different. Heavy. Charged. The beeping stopped and the screen on her scanner went blank. "Dr. Voss to base," Marcus said from outside. "Do you copy? What's going on in there?" Before she could answer, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Then she saw it. A faint shimmering figure standing at the far end of the room. It was humanoid but distorted, as if it were trapped between two worlds. Its eyes glowed faintly as it turned toward her. Dr. Voss froze, unable to speak. The figure moved closer, its form flickering like static on an old screen. Then it spoke. The voice was layered, echoing. "Help us," it said. Alara stumbled backward, her scanner falling from her hand. Marcus burst into the room, his weapon drawn. "What the hell is that?" he shouted. The figure didn't react. It only repeated its words. "Help us." Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving behind only the faint hum of static in the air. Alara stared at the empty space where it had stood, her mind racing. This wasn't just a failed colony, she realized. These people had never truly left. "We need answers," she said, her voice trembling. "Whatever happened here, it's not over." Marcus nodded, his face grim. "Then let's find out what we're dealing with." Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the same faint whispers. The ghosts of New Purgatory were waiting. The camp was set up in the shadow of the colony's central dome. The small lights from their equipment cast long shadows across the desolate plaza. Alara sat at a folding table, staring at the scanner she had dropped in the building. The screen flickered with static, occasionally showing faint energy spikes. Her hands trembled as she tried to make sense of the readings. Hume sat nearby, tinkering with a drone. He was unusually quiet, his usual sarcastic remarks absent. After a few moments, he finally spoke.
"So,
Ghosts, huh? That's what we're dealing with now." Alara shook her head. "Not ghosts. Not exactly. The figure I saw, it wasn't solid. It was like a projection. A quantum imprint, maybe? Something left behind when the colonists disappeared. Marcus stood a few feet away, scanning the horizon. His weapon was slung across his chest, but his posture was tense. Imprint or not, it spoke to you. That's not just some leftover signal. That's intelligence. Awareness. Alara nodded slowly. She leaned closer to the scanner, adjusting its settings. I think the colony's collapse wasn't just physical. Something affected the people here at a fundamental level. Their presence. Their essence. It's like they're trapped between dimensions. Between moments in time. Hume groaned and set down the drone. Trapped between dimensions? Great. Love to see how the company report explains that one. How are we supposed to fix something like that? We aren't here to fix anything, Alara said firmly. We're here to understand. To figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again. Marcus turned to face them. If these imprints are aware, then they might try to communicate again. We need to be ready. If there's something they need from us, we can't ignore it. Alara's scanner beeped suddenly, interrupting their conversation. She looked down and frowned. There's another energy spike, she said. Stronger than before. It's coming from the old reactor building. The three of them exchanged uneasy glances. The reactor building was on the edge of the settlement, surrounded by decaying structures and overgrown pathways. Reports had suggested it was one of the first areas to fail during the colony's final days. We need to check it out, Alara said, standing up. If the energy signatures are stronger there, it might be the key to understanding what's happening. Marcus nodded. Agreed, but we go in prepared. He gestured for Hume to grab his gear. Let's move. The walk to the reactor building was unnervingly quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the dry ground and the occasional whistle of the wind. The building loomed ahead of them, its exterior cracked and covered in a strange black residue. The air around it felt heavy, almost oppressive. Inside the reactor building, the darkness was absolute. Marcus activated his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The reactor core sat in the center like a dormant beast. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Hume whistled softly. Well, that's not normal. Reactors aren't supposed to do that. Alara stepped forward, scanning the core. The readings were off the charts. Energy spikes she couldn't explain. Patterns that seemed almost organic. This isn't just a reactor anymore, she said. Something changed it. Something. Alive. As if in response, the faint hum of the core grew louder. The patterns on its surface shifted, glowing brighter. The air vibrated with a low-frequency sound that resonated in their chests. Then the whispers began again. Faint at first, but growing louder. Voices overlapping. Pleading. Warning. Help us. Don't let it take us. Save us. Alara's heart raced. She stepped closer to the core, despite Marcus shouting for her to stay back. She reached out her hand, hesitating just inches from the surface. The whispers intensified. Then the core pulsed with light and the room was filled with blinding energy. When the light faded, Alara was no longer in the reactor building. She stood in a field of tall grass under a sky filled with strange stars. The air was warm and the sound of laughter echoed around her. She turned and saw people. The colonists. They were alive, smiling, going about their lives as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But it wasn't real. She could feel it. The edges of the scene flickered like static. A simulation, a memory, or a trap. One of the colonists approached her, a woman with kind eyes and a face full of hope. Please help us, she said. We are stuck. We can't leave. It won't let us. What won't let you, Alara asked. What is keeping you here? The woman's expression darkened. The light. It's alive. It feeds on us. On our memories. Our energy. It doesn't want us to go because without us it dies. Alara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the scene collapsed. The field and the colonists vanished, and she was back in the reactor building. Marcus was shaking her shoulders, yelling her name. Hume was shouting something about energy levels spiking. She blinked, trying to steady herself. I saw them, she said. The colonists. They're alive, or part of them is. But they're trapped. The reactor. It's not just a machine anymore. It's something else. Something alive. Marcus let go of her, stepping back. Then we need to figure out how to stop it. The hum of the core grew louder, as if in defiance. The whispers returned louder than before. Help us. It's watching. It knows. Alara stared at the core, her mind racing. They had come to New Purgatory looking for answers. But now they were part of the mystery. and whatever was inside the reactor was aware of them, watching, waiting, and it was hungry. The team regrouped at the edge of the reactor building. The energy pulsing from the core had grown stronger, and the air itself felt charged with electricity. Alara leaned against the wall, clutching her scanner tightly, her mind replaying the images of the colonists trapped in that strange simulation. Marcus stood nearby, his hand never far from his weapon, while Hume was furiously working on his drone, his hands trembling slightly. "We need a plan," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Whatever that thing is in the reactor, it knows we're here, and I don't think it's going to let us walk away." Alara nodded, forcing herself to focus. She scanned the readings again, her fingers moving quickly over the device. "The energy signatures are tied to the core," she said. "It's not just powering the reactor anymore, it's feeding on it. And on the colonists." Hume looked up, his face pale. "Feeding on them? Like what, sucking out their souls or something?" "Not their souls," Alara said. "Their energy. Their memories. Their essence. That's why they're trapped. The core has turned into some kind of parasitic entity, and it's using their life force to sustain itself." "Great," Hume muttered. "So it's a giant ghost-eating monster. Awesome. Love that for us." Marcus ignored him, turning to Alara. "Can we shut it down? Destroy it?" Alara hesitated, staring at the glowing patterns on the scanner. "I don't know. If we destroy the core, we might destroy the colonists too. They're tied to it somehow." "I saw them, Marcus. They're still in there, or at least part of them is. We can't just wipe them out." "Then what do you suggest?" Marcus asked, his tone sharp. "Because sitting here isn't going to solve anything." Alara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to communicate with it. Whatever it is, it's aware. It's intelligent. If we can understand what it wants, maybe we can find a way to free the colonists without destroying them." Hume stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Communicate with it? Are you hearing yourself? That thing doesn't want to talk. It wants to eat us." "We don't know that," Alara said firmly. "If it wanted to harm us, it could have already. It's trying to scare us, yes, but it hasn't attacked. That means there's a reason. We need to figure out what it is." Marcus sighed, his jaw tight. "Fine, but if it so much as twitches in our direction, I'm putting it down." The three of them moved back into the reactor building, the hum of the core growing louder as they approached. The light from the patterns on its surface cast strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Alara stepped forward cautiously, holding up her scanner like a shield. "We're not here to hurt you," she said, her voice steady. "We just want to understand. Why are you keeping them here? What do you want?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping and chaotic. "Help us. Leave. Stay. Protect. Danger." Alara frowned, trying to make sense of the words. They seemed disjointed, like fragments of different voices all speaking at once. She stepped closer, the air growing colder with each step. "We can help you," she said, "but we need to know what's keeping you here. What's feeding on you?" The whisper stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, resonating voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "They chose to stay. They sustain me. They are mine." Alara's breath caught in her throat. The core wasn't just feeding on the colonists, it had made them part of itself. It had merged with them, creating a symbiotic existence where they couldn't leave even if they wanted to. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" The voice hesitated, as if struggling to find the words. "Survival. I was abandoned. Left to die. They gave me life. I give them purpose." Alara's mind raced. The reactor hadn't malfunctioned, it had been abandoned during the colony's collapse, left to degrade and evolve into something new. Something alive. And now it was clinging to the only connection it had to its creators. "We can find another way," she said. "You don't have to trap them. Let us help you." The light from the core flickered and the temperature dropped further. "Help me? How? You will abandon me as they did." "No," Alara said firmly. "We won't, but you need to trust us. Let us try." The core pulsed again, and suddenly the room shifted. Alara was no longer standing in the reactor building. She was back in the simulation, the field of grass, the strange sky, and the colonists. But this time the scene was different. The colonists looked at her with fear, their forms flickering like unstable holograms. "You can't stop it," one of them said. "It won't let us go. It's too afraid." Alara turned to the voice, recognizing the woman she had spoken to before. "Then help me," Alara said. "If we work together, we can find a way out. But I can't do it alone." The woman hesitated, then nodded. Her form flickered again, and the other colonists began to gather around her. Their voices joined together, a chorus of whispers blending into one. "We will try," they said. The scene collapsed, and Alara was back in the reactor building. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a console. Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her. "What happened?" he asked. Alara looked up at the core, which was now glowing brighter than ever. "They're willing to help," she said. "But we have to act fast. The core is unstable. If we don't find a way to disconnect the colonist without destroying it, this whole place could go up in flames." Hume groaned. Of course it could, because nothing about this mission could ever be easy. Marcus tightened his grip on his weapon. "Then let's figure it out, because if that thing decides it doesn't like us anymore, we're going to be the next ones it traps." Alara nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the colonists and possibly themselves hung in the balance. The core pulsed violently as Alara worked furiously at the console, sweat dripping down her face despite the freezing air. She had managed to isolate the colonists' energy signatures from the core's primary functions, but the process was delicate. One wrong move and everything, the colonists, the core, and her team could be lost. Marcus stood guard by the doorway, his weapon trained on the core, though he knew it was useless against something so alien. Hume was beside Alara, patching cables and rerouting power lines as she barked instructions. The air was thick with tension, and the hum of the core grew louder, almost as if it could sense what they were trying to do. "It's resisting," Alara said, her voice tight. "The core doesn't want to let them go. It's afraid." "Then make it understand," Marcus snapped. "We don't have time for this." Alara closed her eyes for a moment, focusing her thoughts. The colonists had agreed to help, but the core's fear was overwhelming their efforts. She placed her hand on the console, speaking aloud to the entity. "You're not alone anymore. We're here. But if you hold on to them, you'll destroy yourself and them. Let us help you survive in a different way." The core's glow flickered, the patterns on its surface shifting erratically. The deep, resonating voice returned, trembling with uncertainty. "I cannot. They are my life, my purpose." "No," Alara said firmly. "You are more than this. Let them go and we'll find you another way to exist. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The colonists' whispers joined in, their voices soft but insistent. "Let us go," they said. "It's time." The core pulsed one last time, brighter than ever, flooding the room with light. Alara braced herself, but the energy wasn't hostile. It was releasing, unwinding. She watched as the glowing patterns began to fade, the core's hum growing softer. The colonists' forms appeared one by one around the room, faint and shimmering but smiling. The woman who had spoken to Alara stepped forward. "Thank you," she said. "You freed us." Before Alara could respond, the figures began to dissipate, their light streaming into the air like fireflies. The energy flowed out of the reactor building, scattering into the sky and leaving behind an almost deafening silence. Alara slumped against the console, her chest heaving.